Hey, it's Liz from No Trace. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this really cute pattern piece using paper piecing, and we're going to do it in a way that doesn't involve sewing through the paper or using freezer paper or using any kind of glue or adhesive. This way you can use your piece of paper over and over and over again, and you can recycle your piece of paper at the very end of its life or compost it. It won't have any kind of toxic chemicals on it. I have a second video that shows you how to turn this really cute pattern piece into a zipper pouch, so I'm going to link to that video right here. Go ahead and check it out. Also, the pattern piece is a free download on my website, so I'm going to link to that in the description box. So if you want to make this, go ahead and snag that pattern piece. It's totally free, and let's go. The pattern piece to make this design is on my website, so I'm going to link to it in the description below this video. So it's a free printable pattern, so go ahead and you're going to want to print that out. Once you print it, you want to trim off the white so that you just have a pattern piece that's 7.5 by 10 inches. Once it's trimmed down to size, we're going to get a ruler and we're going to fold along these diagonal lines by just putting the ruler right on the line and then pressing the paper towards the ruler with our hand. And we can stop when we get close to this bottom long line. Okay, so just take a moment and fold along each line. And then we also want to fold along this line as well. So go ahead and get the ruler right there and press. Okay, so now our paper has a bunch of creases in it, which is what we want. Next, you want to get your scraps of fabric, and this is a sort of rainbow kind of motif, but obviously you could do it however you want to do it. I have put the colors on each of the sections of this piece of paper, and we're going to start with the navy on this side, and you want to find a scrap of fabric that is going to cover this entire section that says navy, and it's going to actually, you want your scrap to go beyond at least 1/4 of an inch around all of these sides. So if you just take a scrap of fabric and lay it down, you can then hold your paper up to light, and I know it's hard for you to see, but if you just kind of hold it up to some light, you'll be able to tell if your piece of fabric is going to cover that whole section or not. You'll be able to see those dark lines even through a dark piece of fabric like this. And once you have it in position and you know it's going to cover the whole shape, you're going to want to get a couple of pins and pin it in place. And I'm going to go ahead and pin it with 2 pins so it doesn't move around on me. And if you want to chop off some of your scrap, like if you have a really big piece like I do, you could absolutely chop it down a bit to make it a little easier to work with. Now I also want to point out that I'm putting the wrong side down on the pattern. So this is a solid, it doesn't really have a right or wrong, but if you were working with the print, you want right side up and you want the wrong side touching the paper. Now I'm going to use this crease that I made on that line, and I'm going to press my fabric on that same crease so that I have a nice crease on my fabric as well. And this is going to be where I'm going to be attaching the next piece for this pattern, which I have marked as purple. So I'm going to get a scrap of purple fabric, and I'm going to lay it over the section that says purple. And I want to make sure that I can cover the whole section with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, especially up to that little corner there. So just make sure you've got the whole thing covered, and you can again hold your pattern piece up to light and check that your fabric covers the whole section. And like I did with the navy, if you want to chop off some of it, we're going to clean this up obviously as we sew, but if you want to make it a little bit easier to work with, go ahead and do that. Okay, so once you're certain that you've got enough fabric to cover this piece, you're going to put it right side on top of your navy piece, okay? And you're going to kind of imagine that you're going to be sewing these together on that crease line, and just take a moment and flip your purple piece back to make sure it's still covering the whole section that says purple. And if it doesn't, you can move it around and make sure that when you sew on this line, on this crease that we have, so I'm going to move it down a little bit more. When we sew and we flip our purple piece back over, that whole purple section is going to be covered. And for this piece, we're good to go. So again, I'm just going to lay it on top of the navy, and I'm going to pin it to the navy as well. And I'm pinning this so that the pointy part of the pin is pointed towards that fold line that we made, because we're going to keep these pins in place while we sew. So what we want to do once the purple is pinned to the blue is we want to again fold them on that crease line. Where's that crease line? So flip it over and fold them on that crease line. This is going to be our stitch line, that crease. And then we're going to actually fold our paper back in the opposite direction. And this folded edge is going to be our guide as we sew. Okay, so we have it creased on both fabrics, but we also have this folded edge to follow. So let's take this over to the machine. Okay, so now I'm at the machine and I'm going to lift my presser foot and I'm going to start sewing just about a 1/4 inch past the line here on the pattern piece. So I'm going to start right about here. And I'm going to sew right next to the paper. I'm not going to sew on the paper. I'm going to sew right next to the paper. And I'm going to do a back stitch. And then just go straight down. And take your time so that you don't catch your paper, so that you can reuse this pattern piece over and over again. Okay, I've gone past about a 1/4 inch. I'm just going to do a little back stitch and stop. So it should look like that. Now that these are sewn together, I'm going to get my ruler and I'm going to cut off the extra fabric. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm leaving a 1/4 inch of fabric and I'm cutting off the rest. Now, if you don't have a rotary cutter, you could absolutely do this with scissors. I do find a rotary cutter is a little bit easier, but you just need a standard ruler and some scissors. And then we've trimmed it down. So now we're going to fold it open. We can take out the pin that was holding the purple in place. Now I'm leaving these 2 pins in place, but I'm going to open up the seam allowance here and I'm going to press this seam open with the iron. You could also do that with your fingers, but it's a little bit better with the iron. And then we can open up the whole piece and press again on the top of the piece. Just like that. Okay, so now that these 2 are pressed, we're going to be folding on the next crease line that's in between the purple and the next color, which is this darker turquoise blue. So flip your paper over or just peek like this and fold it on that crease line that we made earlier. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually trim off some of the extra purple, okay? So you've created a nice crease there in the purple. I'm going to flip the paper back on that crease line, the crease line between turquoise and purple, and I'm going to actually trim about a 1/2 inch of the purple off, so it's a little bit easier to add on my next piece. So again, this is easiest to do with a ruler. If you don't have a rotary cutter, just use your scissors. And we're going to do about a 1/2 inch. We want a little bit more fabric to work with here. All right, so I've trimmed away the extra purple. Now we're going to flip it back over. Whoop, make sure that seam stays nice and open. Okay, we get our scrap of turquoise fabric and we want to make sure that it's going to cover this whole section of turquoise. Okay, so you can kind of pull away your purple. Make sure that you have enough turquoise to cover it with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way around, and it does. So then we lay our turquoise on that crease line. We overlap that crease line about 1/4 of an inch or more, and then flip it over and imagine if you had sewn there, is it still going to cover the whole turquoise section? And it will. So this is ready to be pinned onto the purple. So let's go ahead and pin this onto purple. Again, I'm going to do the pin pointing towards that crease line so it doesn't get in the way when we sew. And if you want to do a couple of pins so it doesn't move around, that's probably a good idea. And now we'll find that crease line that we made that's between turquoise and purple, and we're going to fold the fabric on that crease line. Okay, so we have a nice crease, and you could press it with the iron or just press it with your fingers. So you have a nice crease in those fabrics. And then we're going to fold the whole paper back so that we can again use the paper as our guide to sew these two fabrics right along the edge of the paper. Again, I'm going to start my stitches about 1/4 inch away from where the triangle starts. And I'm going to do a little back stitch. And then just take my time and follow the paper all the way down. Okay, once again, I have that seam line right along the edge of the paper. And once again, I want to trim it down to about 1/4 of an inch. And you can use scissors or you can use a rotary cutter and just go all the way down. And we can actually cut off a lot of this extra fabric down here too. We don't need all of this anymore. Once again, we will flip our whole pattern piece around. We'll take the pins out of the turquoise, but we still have the pins on that very first piece that we were working with. We're going to go ahead and open that seam and press it with the iron so that it lays flat. It'll just make it a little bit easier when we attach the bottom piece down here. Okay, and then we can press the whole piece flat as well. And just check that the seams are staying open. You can kind of pull this away and then press it down onto the paper so that it's staying open. It wants to flip the other way. So just take a moment and get it to lay flat for you, and then go ahead and press with the iron. All right, once all of the pieces are attached to each other in this first part, this kind of rainbow part of the pattern, it's time to trim things up. So go ahead and flip your paper over, and we're just going to start and trim these 3 sides. And again, a rotary cutter and ruler will be the fastest, easiest way to do this, but you could definitely do this with your scissors and just follow along that line carefully. So those 3 edges are trimmed. Now we want to get ready to work on this last part of the pattern piece, which is a long strip of the navy fabric. I'm going to be moving these pins out of this navy, and we want to find that fold line that we created and just press the fabric on that fold line, and then we can press it back. And if you want, you can kind of trim off some of the extra fabric from this area so you have about 1/4 of an inch to work with in the next step, which is what I am going to do. I'm going to go ahead and trim this down. And there is one section that's a bit thicker, so take your time, make sure you get that spot. And now we're ready to get one more strip of fabric. We want to make sure it's going to cover this whole rectangle that says navy with at least 1/4 of an inch along the edges, all 4 edges, and this is going to work. So we're going to put it with the right sides together on top of our rainbow part. And just like we were doing with this rainbow, go ahead and flip it over. Make sure it's still going to cover the whole area after you've sewn along that crease line. So you can crease it and flip it and just do another double check that it's going to look good, and it will. So I'll go ahead and take this to the machine. We'll pin it first. A couple of pins in here. And then, just like we were doing with the other parts of the pattern, we're going to fold the paper back, and we're going to use the paper as our seam guide. So we'll sew right next to it. Okay, so I've stitched right along the edge where the paper is. And now we can take these pins out. Once again, we'll get the iron over here. And we want to open up this seam that we just made and press it with the iron. Once we've pressed open that seam, just like you were doing with these seams, we're going to kind of flip it under so that we keep that opening, and then fold our pattern piece open. So we're just trying to get these seams to lay flat when this piece is folded over. So just, it's a little bit fussy. Just take a moment and fiddle with it, and then go ahead and press the top seam. We're almost done with our rainbow piece, and you can double check. And this seam, it doesn't absolutely have to lay flat because we're not attaching a bunch more pieces right along here, but it's just nice if you can get it. You can make it work. It's nice, but not necessary. Just press it one more time. Now we're going to flip it over so we can see our paper again. And again, we want to trim along the paper with the rotary cutter or scissors if you don't have a rotary cutter. You could also draw a line along there if you just have scissors to work with. Draw a line on your fabric so you know where to cut. And just flip until it's all cleaned up. Then just take your pins out and your piece is done. I give it one more press with the iron, and now the pattern piece is done and it's ready for the next step. I have another video that shows you how to turn this really cute pattern piece into a zipper pouch, so I'm going to link to that right here. And if you made it this far, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the No Trace channel to get notified about all of our videos. We put out a new video every single week on zero waste sewing, crafting, and lifestyle tips. So I'll see you again very soon.